Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Jacob walked along the sidewalk, feeling the cool evening air of Albuquerque envelop him. The bag with the laptop was weighing down his shoulder, and his head was spinning with a list of tasks that he had not managed to complete at work. The architectural firm where he worked had been on the verge of chaos in recent months. Projects were falling apart, clients were demanding the impossible, and his boss, Mr. Ramirez, was doing nothing but waving his arms and shouting about deadlines. Jacob exhaled, adjusted the strap of his bag, and quickened his pace. The house was not far away, and the thought that Clara might already be preparing dinner, and there was a bottle of cheap red wine on the table, warmed him from the inside. He turned the corner and stopped at the Mesquite coffee shop where he and Clara often sat on weekends. The display case glowed with a warm yellow light, reflecting his tired face. Jacob smiled involuntarily, remembering how Clara once spilled a latte on her white blouse and laughed so loudly that all the customers turned around. He was about to pass by, but something, maybe habit or intuition, made him linger. His gaze slid inside, and the world froze. There, at a table by the window, sat Clara. Her dark hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her fingers nervously fiddled with the edge of the napkin. Opposite her is Mateo, his best friend since college, the guy he shared pizza with at 3 in the morning and argued about who was better, Nolan or Spielberg. Mateo leaned towards Clara, his hand on her wrist, but she did not move away. Their faces were so close that Jacob felt the blood pounding in his temples. He blinked, hoping it was a trick of the light, fatigue, whatever, but no. Clara smiled, and that smile, which he considered his own, now belonged to someone else. "Hey, are you okay, buddy?" The voice of a passer-by pulled him out of his stupor. Some guy with a dog looked at him with slight concern. Jacob nodded, muttered something incomprehensible, and forced himself to move on. My legs felt weak, and there was a lump in my throat. He didn't remember how he got home, how he inserted the key into the lock, or how he threw his bag on the floor in the hallway. The apartment greeted him with silence. Clara hasn't returned yet. Of course, she's in a coffee shop. With him. He walked into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, but immediately closed it without taking anything. My stomach clenched, and the thought of food made me feel nauseous. Jacob sank into a chair, staring at the wooden tabletop, where traces of his and Clara's morning coffee still remained. He tried to remember if there were any signs, hints, something that he had missed. But only the image of Mateo was spinning in my head, his hand on her wrist, her smile. The door slammed. Jacob winced, straightening up. "Jake, are you home?" Clara's voice was light, almost carefree. She walked into the kitchen, throwing her purse on the sofa. Her cheeks were slightly pink, as if she was in a hurry. "Oh, you should have seen the traffic jam on Central today. I thought I was going crazy." He looked at her, trying to find something in her face: guilt, awkwardness, lies. But she looked as usual, a little disheveled, with the same soft smile that always made his heart beat faster. "Where have you been?" His voice sounded quieter than he expected, but there was a heaviness in it that he himself did not immediately realize. Clara froze, her hand reaching for the teapot stopped in the air. "What?" She turned around, frowning slightly. "At work? Where else?" "Then I went to a coffee shop to drink a latte. You know I do this sometimes." "At Mesquite?" He didn't take his eyes off her. Her eyebrows twitched, but she nodded quickly. "Yeah. What is it? You're kind of strange." "Who were you with?" The words came out on their own, sharper than he intended. Clara fell silent. For a split second, her face went blank, as if she was trying to decide what to say. Then she laughed shortly, nervously. "Jake, are you serious? I was alone. I sat, drank coffee, and scrolled through my phone. What kind of interrogation?" He slowly rose from his chair, feeling something inside him breaking. Her voice, her laughter, everything he loved now seemed alien. I saw you, Clara, he said, and his voice trembled with suppressed rage. With Mateo. At Mesquite. You were sitting by the window. His hand was on yours. She opened her mouth, but didn't make a sound. Her eyes widened and something flashed in them: fear, shame. Jacob expected her to start making excuses, screaming, explaining, but she just stood there, looking at him as if he were a stranger. It's not what you think, she finally managed. We were just talking. He came in and we chatted. Nothing like that. Nothing like that? He stepped closer, and she involuntarily retreated. You were sitting with my best friend, Clara. You smiled at him the way you used to smile at me. And you say, nothing like that? Jake, listen. Her voice became higher, almost pleading. You misunderstood everything. Mateo just. He walked by, we started talking. This doesn't mean that. Stop it, he interrupted. Just stop lying. I saw the way he looked at you. How did you not pull away? I'm not blind. She fell silent, looking down. Her fingers gripped the edge of the tabletop, and Jacob noticed how white her knuckles were. The silence was unbearable, but he didn't know what else to say. All he wanted to hear the truth she wasn't going to give him. I'm not lying, she said quietly, finally looking up. But if you don't believe me, I don't know what to do. He looked at her, and at that moment he realized that he no longer saw in her the girl with whom he shared his life for 2 years. The one who sang to the radio while she cooked scrambled eggs, the one who fell asleep on his shoulder during boring movies. She was here, but it was as if she wasn't there. I don't know either, he said and turned to the door. Jake, wait! She grabbed his sleeve, but he gently but firmly pulled away. I need to think, he said without turning around, and left the kitchen. He took the keys and jacket and left the apartment without giving her a chance to add anything. The street greeted him with coldness, but he barely noticed it. Jacob walked without making any sense of the road until he came to an old park at the edge of the neighborhood. There, on a bench under a lantern, he finally stopped. His hands were shaking, and he put them in his pockets to stop the trembling. He tried to remember when everything went wrong. Was it his long hours at work, or her frequent meetings with friends, which she talked about more and more often? Or maybe Mateo was always closer than he thought. Memories of their gatherings together, he, Clara, Mateo, a couple of bottles of beer and laughing until the morning now seemed like poison. How could he be so blind? Night had fallen over the city, and the lanterns cast long shadows. Jacob took out his phone, opened Mateo's contact, and looked at his name for a long time. He wanted to call, scream, demand answers, but he knew it was useless. Instead, he simply blocked the number. Then he did the same with Clara's number. He didn't return home that night. I rented a room in a cheap motel on the outskirts, which smelled of dampness and old carpet. Lying on the hard bed, he looked at the ceiling, listening to cars being noisy outside the window. Sleep did not come. An emptiness grew in my chest, mixed with something sharp, like pain. He closed his eyes, but Clara and Mateo were still standing in front of them, their faces, their closeness. How could you? He whispered into the darkness, but there was no answer. Morning came too quickly, but it did not bring relief. Jacob stood up, washed his face with cold water, and looked at himself in the mirror. His eyes were red, his face was drawn, but something inside him began to change. The pain was still there, but something else was brewing next to it: determination. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't let it break him. The morning in Albuquerque was gray, with low clouds that seemed to weigh down the city. Jacob was sitting in his car in front of the house he didn't dare return to yesterday. The ignition key was inserted, but it did not start the engine. Last night was spinning in my head. Clara, Mateo, the coffee shop, her smile, his hand on her wrist. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his fingers turned white. The night in the motel did not bring clarity, but only strengthened the feeling that he was standing on the edge of an abyss. But he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't just leave it like that. Jacob got out of the car, slammed the door, and headed towards the entrance. His steps echoed loudly in the silence of the morning courtyard. The key in the lock turned with the usual click, but the feeling of home that always accompanied this sound disappeared. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. He stopped in the hallway, listening. Somewhere in the depths of the apartment, a floorboard creaked. "Clara?" His voice sounded hoarse, as if he had not spoken for several days. "Jake?" Her voice came from the living room, surprised, but with a slight trembling. She appeared in the doorway, dressed in an old t-shirt and indoor pants. Her hair was disheveled, and there were shadows under her eyes. She looked like she wasn't sleeping either. You're back. I thought you." "What? Gone forever?" He stepped forward, and she involuntarily retreated. His gaze was cold, but everything was boiling inside. "I want to talk. Right now." Clara swallowed, her fingers nervously fiddling with the hem of her t-shirt. She nodded and walked into the living room, sitting down on the sofa. Jacob remained standing with his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't want to sit down and didn't want to feel comfortable in this conversation. It wasn't about comfort. "What happened in the coffee shop yesterday?" he began, trying to keep his voice even. "And don't lie, Clara. I saw you and Mateo. I want to know the truth." She looked up at him, and something flashed in them, a mixture of fear and fatigue. Her lips trembled, but she remained silent, as if choosing her words. Jacob waited, feeling the seconds tick by, as if time had stood still. "It's not what you think," she finally said, but her voice was weak, unconvincing. "We just met by chance. He went into a coffee shop, I was there, and we started talking. Nothing more." "Anything else?" He raised his voice, unable to restrain himself. "You sat with him, Clara. His hand was on yours, you were." He stopped, unable to find words. "You looked like you were a couple. Don't lie to me. I saw your smile. I know how you smile when you feel good." Her face turned pale, and she looked down, staring at her hands. Silence hung between them, heavy as a concrete slab. Jacob felt his heart pounding, his blood pounding in his temples. He wanted her to scream, to deny, to prove him wrong. But she was silent. "Say something," he almost growled. "Say I came up with this, that I'm crazy. Whatever." "Clara," she slowly raised her head, and her eyes were wet. Not from tears, but from something close. She took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "Okay," she said quietly. "Do you want the truth? I don't know how to explain this. Mateo, he was there when you weren't." It wasn't. Jacob felt his fists clench. "I was at work, Clara. I worked hard so that we could afford this apartment, so that we could have a future. What did you do? Dating my best friend behind my back. This is wrong." She jumped up from the sofa, her voice breaking into a scream. "You don't understand. You've always been busy, Jake. Always projects, calls, meetings. I felt lonely. And Mateo, he just listened. He was there. Did you listen?" He stepped towards her, and she retreated again. "Is that all? Were you just talking? Don't lie to me, Clara. I saw you. It didn't seem like just a conversation." She fell silent, pressing her palms to her face. Her shoulders shook, and Jacob knew she was about to cry. But instead of pity, he felt only rage mixed with pain that was tearing him apart from the inside. "How many times?" he asked, and his voice became quieter, but there was steel in it. "How many times have you met him? How long have you been lying to me?" Clara lowered her hands, and her eyes finally met his. There was a mixture of guilt and despair in them. "It happened. Several times," she admitted, almost in a whisper. "It's nothing serious, Jake, I swear. I don't know how it happened. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't want to." He laughed, but the laughter was bitter, almost hysterical. "You were dating my best friend, Clara. You sat with him, smiled at him, let him touch you. And you're saying you didn't mean to hurt me." "I'm sorry." Her voice trembled. Tears finally rolled down her cheeks. "I don't know what to say. I'm confused. I didn't want it to turn out like this. Please, Jake, let's talk. We can." "No," he interrupted, stepping back. "We can't. I can't look at you and not see him. I can't be in this apartment knowing that you lied to me. It's over." "Jake, Wait, she rushed to him, grabbing his hand. Don't go, please. We can fix everything. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't go. He looked at her hand, squeezing his wrist, and felt something inside him completely break. He gently but decisively pulled himself free. You have already made your choice, he said, and his voice was empty, as if all the energy had drained from him. And it's not me. He turned and went into the bedroom. Clara remained standing in the living room, her sobs echoing throughout the apartment. Jacob didn't look back. He opened the closet, took out a sports bag, and began throwing things into it: t-shirts, jeans, a phone charger. His movements were mechanical, as if he was looking at himself from the outside. He didn't take anything extra, only what would fit in his bag. He didn't even touch the photographs of them together that were on the nightstand. They didn't matter anymore. When he returned to the hallway, Clara was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees. She raised her tear-stained face to him, but did not say a word. Jacob stopped, looking down at her. Part of him wanted to hug her, to tell her that everything would be okay, but that part was too weak, drowned out by pain and betrayal. I'll find a place to stay, he said, his voice even, almost foreign. Don't call me. Don't write. I need time. Jake, she began, but he had already opened the door. Goodbye, Clara, he said without turning around, and left. The street greeted him with a cold wind, but he did not feel it. The bag weighed down on his shoulder, but that was the only weight he noticed. He took out his phone, opened the settings, and turned it off without hesitation. The screen went dark, and with it, it seemed, part of his life went out. Jacob threw his bag into the back seat of the car and got behind the wheel. He turned on the radio to distract himself, but the very first song, Slow, with a hysterical guitar, hit his nerves. It was the same tune that Clara had once danced to in the kitchen, waving a wooden spoon as the pasta sauce sizzled on the stove. Jacob turned off the radio with a sharp movement, as if it had burned him. The silence in the car became even heavier. His thoughts involuntarily drifted back. Clara. Their first meeting was in a bookstore when she was leafing through a collection of Rilke's poems and accidentally dropped the book at his feet. Her awkward laugh as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, apologizing. Then he thought that her smile was something rare, like a sunny day in November. They started dating, and every moment with her felt right. Walks along the Rio Grande, nights talking about what their future would be like, her habit of falling asleep with her head buried in his shoulder. He believed it would be forever. How could he be so naive? And then Mateo. His face came to mind like a still from an old movie. They met during their freshman year of college when they both enrolled in a film history course. Mateo was loud, charismatic, always the center of attention, but with Jacob he was different, real. They spent their nights arguing about Blade Runner, sharing one bottle of beer between two, because there was never enough money. Mateo was the one who pulled him out of his funk when Jacob failed his exams or had a fight with his father. He was the brother Jacob never had, and now this brother stuck a knife in his back. Jacob slammed his fist on the steering wheel, and a sharp pain in his knuckles brought him back to reality. He didn't know what was worse, Clara's betrayal or Mateo's. They were both part of his world, and now that world was crumbling like a sand castle under a wave. He forced himself out of the car and headed to the office. The architectural bureau was located in the city center, in an old building with large windows that let in too much light. Jacob usually loved this place, the smell of the blueprints, the buzz of voices, the feeling that he was creating something important. But today everything was annoying. The creaking of the door, the secretary's voice, even the coffee machine, which, as luck would have it, chewed on his coin. Hey Jake, are you okay? The voice of Lisa, his colleague, pulled him out of his thoughts. She stood at his desk, holding a folder with sketches in her hands. Lisa was short, with short red hair and a habit of saying everything directly, which sometimes infuriated her and sometimes saved her. Fine, he muttered, without raising his eyes from the monitor. He didn't even turn on the computer. He just stared at the black screen. Yet, of course, Lisa snorted, putting the folder on the table. You look like you've been run over by a truck. What happened? Jacob clenched his jaw. He didn't want to talk about it, But Lisa wasn't one to back down easily. She crossed her arms and looked at him as if she was going to wait all day for an answer. Clara, he finally squeezed out. And, Mateo, I saw them together. At the coffee shop. Lisa raised an eyebrow, but her face remained calm. How is it together? Were you chatting or? We weren't just talking. His voice trembled, and he hated himself for it. They are. Close. Too close. She admitted that she was dating him. Behind me. Damn, Lisa whistled, lowering herself onto the edge of his table. This is shit, Jake. Seriously crap. Sorry. He shrugged as if that would shake off the pain. Lisa was silent for a few seconds, then leaned closer. Look, I'm not a relationship guru, but maybe you should let go. She raised her hand, anticipating his protest. I know, it sounds like a cliché, but thank God, this is a girl, not a wife, without a mortgage and a couple of children. You can start again, without all this. Let go. He looked at her, and rage flashed in his eyes. Are you serious? They both betrayed me, Lisa. She lied to me, he lied to me, and you say, just forget? I'm not saying forget, Lisa sighed, adjusting her glasses. I'm saying don't let it eat you up. You're better than them, Jake. Don't waste your life dealing with this crap. He turned away, feeling her words scratch something inside him. Let go. It's easy to say. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara, her smile directed at Mateo. He heard her voice, her sorry, which meant nothing. And Mateo, his laugh, his confidence, as if he had the right to take everything that belonged to Jacob. I don't want to let go, he said quietly, almost to himself. I want her to feel what I feel, so that she knows what it's like when everything falls apart. Lisa looked at him with concern, but did not argue. Just be careful, okay? Revenge is like a boomerang. Sometimes he comes back and hits you. He didn't answer. Lisa patted him on the shoulder and went to her desk, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The workday dragged on painfully slowly. Jacob tried to concentrate on the drawings, but the lines blurred before his eyes. His colleagues exchanged jokes, discussed plans for the weekend, and he felt like a stranger. It was as if an invisible wall had grown between him and the world. By lunchtime, he ran away from the office, unable to bear it. I found myself in a small park nearby, where couriers and students usually had lunch. He sat down on the bench and took a sandwich out of his bag, but didn't touch it. Instead, his gaze fell on a couple sitting on the grass nearby. They laughed and shared a bottle of lemonade, and their happiness cut him like a knife. He remembered how he and Clara sat the same way, how she stole his fries and pretended that it was not her fault. Then he laughed. Now these memories made me want to scream. His fingers clutched the phone, which he never turned on. He knew that there were most likely a lot of messages from Clara, apologies, excuses, maybe even tears. But he didn't want to read them. I didn't want to hear her voice, see her name. And yet, part of him, the part that still loved her despite the pain, wanted her to suffer the same way he did, so that she wakes up with an emptiness in her chest, so that her world also collapses. Jacob woke up in the motel with a feeling of being crushed by something heavy. The ceiling was still the same, with yellowish spots and cracks, which he had already begun to remember. Outside Albuquerque was noisy with morning traffic. Car horns, snatches of conversation, the distant barking of a dog. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of sleep, but the emptiness in his chest did not go away. It had been there from the moment he saw Clara with Mateo, and it only grew deeper every day. But yesterday's thought that he could make her feel the same pain lit a spark in him. Not hope, but something sharper, like a blade. He stood up, washed his face with cold water from the tap, which creaked like an old bicycle, and looked at himself in the cloudy mirror. His face was haggard, with dark circles under his eyes, but his gaze became firmer. Jacob didn't know how far he would go, but he knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't just be a victim. Clara must see that he is not broken, that he can live without her, and better than she can live without him. A plan began to take shape in my head, still vague, like a sketch on a napkin. He didn't want to just date someone new. That would be too easy, too sincere. No, he wanted Clara to see his happiness, so that it would cut her, as Mateo's smile cut him. Staging. The perfect romance that will look real but remain under his control. No feelings, no risks, just a performance. Jacob took out his phone, which he turned on for the first time in 2 days. The screen lit up, showing missed calls and messages, dozens from Clara, a few from colleagues, one from her mother. He didn't read anything, just blocked her number again to make sure she wouldn't get through. Then he opened his notes and began to write, "Find someone. Convincing. Not too difficult." He stopped, thoughtful. Whom? He was not one to make acquaintances easily, and his social circle in recent years had narrowed to Clara, Mateo, and a couple of colleagues. But then a face surfaced in my memory, a warm smile, dark eyes, a light laugh that sounded like the ringing of a bell. Sophia, bartender from the Mesquite Cafe. He and Clara often went there on weekends, and Sophia was always behind the counter, with a towel over her shoulder, a joke ready. Jacob remembered their short conversations when Clara went to the restroom or scrolled through her phone. Sophia asked him about work, talked about a new type of coffee, and once even laughed at his attempt to pronounce mochaccino. She was real, not intrusive, not fake, and more importantly, Clara knew her. I saw them chatting. It could have worked. He got dressed, glanced at the bag with his things still unpacked, and headed towards the city center. Mesquite was only 10 minutes away, but Jacob decided to walk. The morning air helped me think. He imagined Clara entering the cafe and seeing him and Sophia laughing, close, happy. This picture warmed him like fire on a cold day. Let her feel what she's lost. Let him see that he doesn't need her. The cafe greeted him with the familiar smell of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. The morning rush hour had not yet begun, and only Sophia was behind the counter, wiping glasses. Her dark hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, and there was a slight smile on her face, as if she knew some secret that she was in no hurry to share. "Jacob, hi." She looked up and her smile widened. "I haven't seen you for a long time." Coffee as usual, black, no sugar, with an "I hate mornings" look. He involuntarily grinned, feeling the tension in his shoulders release slightly. "Yeah, that's right," he said, sitting down at the counter. "How are you?" "Oh, life in a cafe is sheer glamour." She rolled her eyes, placing the cup in front of him. "I spilled syrup on my jeans," served an old man who ordered just coffee without any of your tricks. "An ordinary day. What do you have?" Jacob looked at her, trying to figure out how to start. She was open, but not stupid. He couldn't just dump his plan like blueprints on the table. It was necessary to approach carefully. Let's just say, not the best period. He took a sip of coffee, feeling the warmth spreading through his chest. "Personal matters. I'm figuring it out." Sophia nodded without asking any further questions. She returned to her glasses, but her gaze was attentive, as if she was waiting for him to continue. "Listen," he began, lowering his voice, "I have an unusual proposal. But I need you to listen to the end, okay?" She raised an eyebrow as she placed the glass on the shelf. "Sounds intriguing. Speak, I have all your attention." Jacob took a deep breath. The moment of truth. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend," he blurted out, the words hanging in the air like smoke. "Not for real, of course. Just a performance. For a while. So that someone can see." Sophia froze, her hand holding the towel stopped. She looked at him, and her eyes narrowed. "Are you serious?" Her voice was even, but there was a sense of wariness in it. "What is this? Revenge? Clara?" He nodded without looking away. There was no point in lying. She already understood everything. "Yes, I want her to understand that I don't sit and suffer, that I'm moving on. You know her, she knows you. It will be believable." Sophia put down the towel and crossed her arms over her chest. Her face became more serious, her smile disappeared. "Jacob," she said, and there was firmness in her voice. "Why should I get involved in your games?" He expected this. She was right, and part of him felt a pang of guilt for even bringing up the subject. But he had no intention of retreating. "I know it's a lot to ask," he said, leaning closer, "and I don't expect you to agree just like that. I can pay. Name the amount. This is not charity, this is a transaction. Her eyebrows flew up, and for a second it seemed that she was going to laugh or send him to hell. But instead she remained silent, looking at him as if she was trying to figure it out. Then her gaze softened, and she turned away, staring at the coffee machine. Money, she repeated quietly, almost to herself. Do you think money solves everything? No, he answered honestly, but I know they can help. If you need something, I want it to be fair. Sophia sighed and ran her hand over her face. Her fingers trembled slightly, and Jacob noticed it for the first time. She wasn't as confident as she seemed behind the counter. I have a sister, she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. Elena. She's 17 and sick. Treatment is expensive and insurance does not cover everything. I work here, I work part-time where I can, but... She paused, swallowing. Sometimes it feels like I'm running in place. Jacob felt his heart clench. He didn't know this part of her life, and now his plan seemed even more selfish. But he didn't back down. How many? He asked softly. Name the amount, Sophia. I'm not a millionaire, but I can help. In exchange for your time. She looked at him, and there was something new in her eyes, not anger, not doubt, but fatigue mixed with determination. 5,000, she said finally. If I agree. But no nonsense, Jacob. It will be according to my rules. No personal boundaries, no real romance. Only a game. He nodded, feeling the tension in his chest release slightly. This was the first step. Not a victory, but a beginning. Agreed, he said, holding out his hand. According to your rules. Sophia looked at his hand, then slowly squeezed it. Her hand was warm, but her grip was firm. I hope you know what you're getting into, she said, a hint of a smile in her voice, because I don't like to lose. Jacob smiled back. Jacob pushed open the glass door of the Mesquite Cafe, and the bell above the entrance tinkled in greeting. Evening light streamed through the large windows, painting the wooden tables in warm colors. The cafe was almost empty. A couple of students in the corner were occupied with their laptops, and an elderly man at the counter was leafing through a newspaper. Sophia stood behind the register, wiping down the coffee machine. Her movements were familiar, but fatigue flashed in her eyes, which she tried to hide with a slight smile. You are punctual, she noted, looking at him. This is good. I don't like it when people are late. I'm trying, Jacob shrugged, placing his bag on the chair at the counter. Ready for rehearsal? Sophia snorted, but there was genuine mockery in her voice. Rehearsals, you say? Are we a theater troupe now? She put the rag down and crossed her arms. Okay, director, where do we start? Jacob took out a notebook where he had jotted down a few ideas the day before. His plan was simple. They would look like a couple that Clara couldn't ignore. Convincing, but not overacting. He wanted everything to look natural: laughter, glances, random touches. But sitting here, opposite Sophia, he suddenly felt awkward, like a teenager before his first date. Okay, he began, trying to sound confident. Imagine that we are sitting here as a couple. Clara comes in and sees us. What are we doing? Sophia raised an eyebrow, clearly amused by his seriousness. Well, for starters, you don't sit there looking like you're taking an exam. She leaned closer, resting her elbows on the counter. Relax. If we are a couple, you should look at me, not at your notebook, as if there was a cheat sheet. He smiled involuntarily, feeling the tension in his shoulders release slightly. Okay, smart girl. Then show me how it's done. Sophia straightened up, her eyes lit up with a mischievous sparkle. She walked around the counter, sat down opposite him, and pulled her chair closer so that their knees were almost touching. Then she leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand, and looked at him with a soft, almost flirtatious smile. That's it, she said quietly. You look at me like I'm the only thing that matters. And maybe you lightly touch my hand, she extended her palm, but stopped without touching it. But not too much so as not to look intrusive. Jacob felt his heart twitch, not from the plan, but from her proximity. Her gaze was warm, but there was a depth to it that he had not noticed before. He coughed, trying to regain control. Not bad, he said, trying to sound casual. You obviously know how it works. You bet, she leaned back in her chair, her smile becoming a little sad. I work part-time as an actress. You know, local theaters, commercials, sometimes extras in TV shows filmed in Santa Fe. Nothing serious, but it helps keep you in shape. An actress? Jacob raised his eyebrows, genuinely surprised. You never told me. You didn't ask, she shrugged, but there was no reproach in her voice. Besides, now I'm more of a barmaid than an actress. Life, you know, likes to prioritize. He nodded, feeling his curiosity awaken. Sophia always seemed easy to him, as if she copes with any difficulties with a smile. But now he saw cracks in that armor, not obvious, but noticeable if you looked closely. Tell me, he asked, surprised at his impulse. About the theater. About everything. Sophia looked at him, as if deciding whether to open up. Then she sighed and began to speak. Her voice became quieter, but warm, as if she was remembering something dear. I have loved the stage since childhood. At school, I played in productions Juliet, Antigone, even the evil witch in The Wizard of Oz. It was like another world. There I could be anyone. Then I went to college. I wanted to study acting, but she fell silent, her fingers nervously fiddling with the edge of the napkin. Life happened. Mom died. Dad left the family even earlier. It's just me and Elena left. Your sister, Jacob said quietly, remembering her words about illness. Yeah, Sophia nodded, her gaze becoming distant. She was 10 when it all started. At first, they thought it was just weakness, but then the diagnosis was a rare autoimmune disease. Treatment helps, but it's expensive. I dropped out of college and started working. Cafe, part-time jobs, sometimes stage. Everything for her. Jacob looked at her, and his throat tightened. He knew Sophia wasn't the type to complain, but her words were as heavy as stones. She spoke calmly, but he saw her shoulders sag slightly, as if she had been carrying this burden for too long. You are strong, he said, and it was sincere. I would. I don't know if I could handle it. She smiled faintly, but gratitude flashed in her eyes. I could handle it. People always cope when there is no choice. But, you know, sometimes I'm so tired that I just want to run away, get in the car and drive somewhere where no one knows my name. And where would you go? He asked, feeling their conversation going away from the plan, but not wanting to interrupt it. Maybe on the coast, she thought, her face softened. California, Oregon, where the ocean roars so loudly that it drowns out everything else. And you. Jacob thought about it. He never thought about such things. His life was always here in Albuquerque, with Clara, with work. But now that she mentioned it, he imagined himself somewhere far away, where there was no pain, no betrayal. I don't know, he answered honestly. Maybe to the mountains, where it's quiet, where you can breathe. She nodded, as if she understood him better than he did. Sounds good, she said, and their eyes met for a second. Not as part of a rehearsal, not as part of a deal. Just two people who saw something real in each other. The moment was interrupted by the ringing of a bell. A new visitor entered the cafe. Sophia stood up, her smile returned, but now there was something soft, almost personal. When the cafe began to close, Sophia walked him to the door. You're not too bad for a newbie, she winked, but her voice was soft. Shall we continue tomorrow? Yeah, he answered, pausing on the threshold. Thank you, Sophia, for everything. She looked at him, and her smile was sincere, without a hint of play. You're welcome, Jacob. Just don't forget that this is a performance, for both of us. He nodded, but as he walked toward the car under the starry Albuquerque sky, he wasn't sure he wanted this to remain just a show. Jacob sat in his car across from the Mesquite Cafe, his fingers nervously tapping the steering wheel. He knew Clara would be here. Every Friday after work, she met in this cafe with her friends Rita and Lauren, sipping a latte and discussing everything from gossip to vacation plans. It was her routine that he had once thought was cute, but was now using as a weapon. Today was their day, his and Sophia's. The day when Clara sees that he is not broken. He looked at his watch, 18:15. The cafe was already filling with evening visitors, and through the window he could see Sophia behind the counter. She moved easily, as always, but today there was an extra confidence in her gestures, as if she was preparing to go on stage. Jacob took a deep breath, trying to stop his hands from shaking. It was not fear, but something close to adrenaline, a mixture of rage and determination. He wanted everything to go perfectly. Jacob got out of the car, straightened his shirt, and headed towards the cafe. The bell above the door jingled and Sophia looked up, her lips immediately curling into a warm smile. She was not wearing the usual barmaid uniform, but a simple mustard-colored dress that made her skin look even warmer. Jacob felt his pulse quicken, but quickly reminded himself, "This is a performance." "Hi," she said, walking around the counter and approaching him. "Ready for the show?" "More than," he answered, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "You look good." She narrowed her eyes slightly, but her smile widened. "Thank you, actor. You're okay, too." She nodded at his dark blue shirt. "Let's go get a table. It's better to be near the window so that we're definitely noticed." They sat at a table near the display window, where the light fell softly, creating a cozy atmosphere. Sophia ordered coffee for them. Jacob looked around the cafe, checking the entrance. Clara was not there yet, but he knew that she would appear. She always came around 6:30. "Relax," Sophia lightly touched his hand, and her fingers were warm. "You're sitting on pins and needles. If we're a couple, you should look happy, not like a guy waiting for a tax audit." He laughed involuntarily, feeling how her lightness relieved the tension. Okay, he said, leaning back in his chair. "How am I coping?" "So far, a C," she winked, leaning closer. "Come on, tell me something. It's like we're on a date. What do you love besides drawings and coffee without sugar?" Jacob thought as he looked at her. Her eyes sparkled, and at that moment he almost forgot about the plan. She was good, not just at acting, but at the way she made him feel. Alive. "Well," he began, "I love old films. Not blockbusters, but something like Casablanca, where everything is simple but catchy." "Oh, classic," Sophia nodded with approval. "Not bad. And I'm more into the theater. Everything is more alive there, closer. Make a mistake, and there is no take." They continued to chat, and Jacob found himself smiling, not for show, but because he was feeling at ease. Sophia leaned closer, laughed at his joke about the coffee machine at work, lightly touched his arm. Their conversation flowed naturally, and he almost did not notice how the bell above the door rang again. But Sophia noticed. Her gaze slid to the entrance, and she slightly squeezed his wrist, giving a signal. Jacob turned around and saw Clara. She walked in with Rita and Lauren, her dark hair down and her usual smile on her face. But when her gaze fell on their table, the smile disappeared. Her eyes widened and she froze, as if she had run into an invisible wall. "It's time," Sophia whispered, and her voice was calm, but there was a sense of steel in it. She leaned even closer, placing her hand on his shoulder, and laughed as if he had just said something incredibly funny. Jacob played along, leaning towards her and smiling as if the whole world was about the girl across from her. Clara stood at the entrance, motionless. Rita said something to her, but she did not answer. Her gaze was fixed on them, and Jacob saw her face change from shock to something sharper, almost painful. He felt a pang of satisfaction, but quickly suppressed it. This was just the beginning. Sophia squeezed his hand lightly, and he turned to her, their faces so close that he could feel her breathing. She smiled, but her eyes were attentive, watching his every move. "You did great," she whispered, and her voice was barely audible. "Hold on." But their game was interrupted. Clara, throwing her bag on Rita's shoulder, headed towards their table. Her steps were fast, almost furious, and Jacob felt his body tense. Sophia remained calm, her hand still lay on his, but now it was not for show, it was support. "Jake," Clara's voice trembled with barely restrained anger. "What the hell is this?" He slowly turned to her, his face as cold as granite. He had been waiting for this moment, imagining it dozens of times, but now, when she stood in front of him, he felt a strange emptiness. Not triumph, not relief, just tiredness. Clara, he said evenly, it's none of your business. Her eyes flashed, and she stepped closer, almost hovering over their table. Is it none of my business? Her voice broke into a scream, and several visitors turned around. You're sitting here, flirting with her, she pointed a finger at Sophia, a week after we broke up? Are you serious? Sophia tilted her head slightly, her gaze calm but sharp. Maybe you should calm down, she said, her tone polite but slightly mocking. We're just drinking coffee. Nobody is forcing you to watch. Clara turned her gaze to her, and her face turned red with rage. Who are you anyway? She spat. The barmaid who decided that she could insert herself into someone else's life like this. Clara, that's enough, Jacob interrupted, his voice icy. He stood between them and looked down at her. You have no right to make a scene. You have made your choice. Now I'm making my own. Her lips trembled, and for a second it seemed like she was going to cry. But instead she straightened up, her eyes burning. You're pathetic, Jake, she said, lowering her voice. Do you think this will make me suffer? You're just ridiculous. He didn't answer, he just looked at her, and his silence was heavier than any words. Clara clenched her fists, then suddenly turned around, grabbed her bag from Rita, and ran out of the cafe. The door slammed so loudly that the bell tinkled pitifully. Silence hung over their table. Sophia exhaled slowly, removing her hand from his. Well, she said, her voice light but with a hint of fatigue, it seems the show was a success. Jacob sank into his chair, feeling the adrenaline drain away, leaving a void in its wake. He looked out the window, where Clara had disappeared into the crowd, and did not know what he was feeling. Satisfaction? Victory? Or just another crack in what's left of his heart? Thank you, he said quietly, turning to Sophia. You were perfect. She smiled, but her gaze was attentive, as if she saw more than he wanted to show. It was your scene, Jake, she replied. I just played mine role. But when she stood up to go back behind the counter, her fingers lingered on his shoulder for a second, and the touch was warmer than necessary for play. Jacob watched her go, and for the first time in a long time, he thought that maybe this performance meant more than he had planned. Jacob stood in the office hallway, looking at the donation box that was now barely closing. A week had passed since he launched the collection for Elena, and every day brought new surprises. Colleagues approached him with questions, shared stories about their families, transferred money, some $10, some $100. The video message he recorded with Lisa spread not only throughout the office, but also among the company's clients, and some of them also joined. Even Mr. Ramirez, usually stingy with emotions, deposited a check for $500, muttering, Don't get used to it, Rivera. This is a one-time thing. By Friday, Jacob had tallied the totals. He sat in the meeting room with Lisa, who helped sort cash and transfers. The amount on his laptop screen seemed unreal, $2,346. This was more than he had dared to hope for, more than he needed for the next stage of Elena's treatment. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, and he felt his throat tighten. Not from fatigue, not from pain, from something new, similar to relief. Jake, do you see this? Lisa pointed her finger at the screen, her eyes shining. This is incredible. Yes, he nodded, still not believing. I thought we would collect 5,000 maximum. Yeah, he underestimated our gang, Lisa grinned, slapping him on the shoulder. Well done. And this girl, Elena, will be okay thanks to you. Not just me, he said quietly. To all of you. But deep down he knew it was for Sophia. He wanted to see her face when she found out. I wanted her to understand that she was not alone in her struggle. Jacob collected the papers, thanked Lisa, and headed to the mesquite. The sum burned in his head like a beacon, and he could not wait until tomorrow. The cafe was busy with evening visitors, but Sophia, as always, stood out behind the counter. Her movements were fast, but Jacob noticed how she sometimes froze, looking into emptiness as if her thoughts were taking her somewhere far away. When she saw him, her face lit up, but her smile was cautious, almost expectant. You again, she said, placing a cup of coffee in front of him, although he had not ordered anything. So, have you decided to become a regular customer? Or is this another act of our performance? Neither one nor the other, he smiled, feeling the nervousness recede. I came to tell you something about the collection. Her hands hovered over the coffee machine, and she looked at him, her brows furrowing slightly. Gathering. Her voice was quiet, as if she was afraid to hear the answer. What? How much did you collect? Jacob took a deep breath, trying to speak calmly, although everything inside was seething with excitement. 20346, he said. And this is not the end. People keep translating. Sophia froze. Her eyes widened, and she slowly sank into the chair behind the counter, as if her legs could no longer support her. She was silent, looking at him, and Jacob was suddenly afraid that he had said something wrong. Sophia? He leaned closer, his voice became softer. Are you okay? She covered her mouth with her hand, and he saw her eyes sparkle. Tears. Not loud, not theatrical quiet, almost unnoticeable, but they rolled down her cheeks, leaving wet trails. This is true. Her voice trembled, as if she was afraid it was a dream. 12,000? For Elena? True, he nodded, feeling his own throat constrict. I brought printouts if you want to check. This is real, Sophia. We did it. She shook her head, her fingers still covering her mouth, as if she was trying to keep her emotions inside. I don't believe it, she whispered. No one has ever done anything like this for us before. Jake, She trailed off, and the tears began to fall more heavily. He walked around the counter without thinking and sat down next to her. Without hugging, without touching, he was just there, giving her space. But Sophia herself reached out to him. Her hand found his palm and squeezed so tightly that he felt her trembling. Thank you, she said, her voice hoarse but sincere. I don't know how to thank you. This is more than I could have dreamed. You don't have to thank me, he replied, looking into her eyes. It's not just me. This is everyone who believed your story. To Elena. She smiled weakly, wiping her tears with her sleeve. You started it anyway, she said. You're crazy, Jake. In a good way. They sat like that for several minutes until Sophia pulled herself together. She let go of his hand, but didn't move away, and Jacob felt the warmth of her closeness. It wasn't like their rehearsals. It wasn't like a game. It was real. Shall we go somewhere? He suddenly suggested, surprised at his own impulse. Not here. Just take a walk. Have something to drink. Celebrate. Sophia looked at him, her eyes still sparkling, but now there was a slight mischievous sparkle in them. Celebrate? She snorted, but her smile grew wider. Okay, I persuaded you, but only if you don't make me drink your boring black coffee. They found themselves in a small bar on the outskirts of the city where live music was playing. A guitarist in the corner was playing something in the folk style. Jacob ordered a beer. Sophia chose a cocktail with a bright umbrella, which she immediately began to twirl in her fingers. They sat at a table by the window, looking out at the lights of Albuquerque, and for the first time in a long time, Jacob felt like he could breathe freely. You know, Sophia began, stirring her cocktail, I thought you were just a guy with a broken heart who wants revenge. But you are different. Another? He raised an eyebrow, but his voice was warm. Is this a compliment, or should I be wary? Compliment, she laughed, and her laughter was light and contagious. You could have just paid me and left. But you stayed, organized it all. For Elena, for me, this means a lot. Jacob shrugged, but her words touched something inside. I just wanted to help, he said. You deserve a break, Sophia. She looked at him, and her gaze was so open that he felt vulnerable. But it wasn't scary, it was right. And you deserve to be happy, she answered quietly. Not to pretend, but the truth. You're good, Jake, even if you don't see it yourself. They continued talking about little things, about music, about how Sophia once almost failed a scene in the theater because she forgot the lyrics. Jacob talked about his first job when he accidentally spilled coffee on a client's drawings. They laughed, and their laughter was real, not for someone else, but for themselves. For the first time in weeks, Jacob didn't think about Clara, about pain, about revenge. He was here with Sophia, and that was enough. When they left the bar, the night enveloped them in coolness. Sophia shivered coldly, and Jacob, without thinking, threw his jacket over her. She looked at him with a smile, but said nothing, only stepped closer as they walked towards her machines. "Today was a good day," she said, stopping at the door. "Thank you, Jake." "Thank you," he replied, and his voice was sincere. "For just being myself." She smiled, and for a second it seemed like she wanted to add something. But instead, she simply nodded and got into the car. Albuquerque breathed the cool of the evening, and the lights of the city were reflected in the dark waters of the Rio Grande. Jacob and Sophia walked along the path along the river, their steps crunching on the gravel, mixing with the distant noise of cars. After the success of the charity fundraiser, they increasingly spent time together, not for rehearsals, not for a deal, but simply because they were having a good time. Today, Sophia suggested going for a walk, saying that she needed to turn off her head after a long shift in a cafe. Jacob agreed, although he was still tormented by doubts inside, not about her, but about himself. They stopped at an old wooden bridge where the river flowed slowly, reflecting the stars. Sophia leaned against the railing, her dark hair flowing in the light breeze. She was wearing a simple denim jacket and a white t-shirt, but Jacob found himself unable to look away. Not because she was beautiful, although she was, but because there was something about her that made him feel whole. "You're quiet today," she said, turning to him. Her eyes sparkled in the twilight, and there was a slight challenge in them. "What's going on in your head? Secrets? Plans for a new revenge?" He smiled weakly, shaking his head. "No revenge," he replied, shoving his hands into his jeans pockets. "Just thinking about many things." Sophia raised an eyebrow, but didn't rush him. She always knew how to wait. She didn't press, didn't get into her soul, but her silence was such that you wanted to talk. Jacob sighed as he looked out over the river, where the moon's reflection trembled on the water. "You know," he began, his voice quieter than usual, "when all this started, with Clara, with Mateo, I thought I would never be able to trust again. No one, even to myself. I was so angry that all I wanted was for her to suffer. But then you showed up." Sophia turned to him. Her face became more serious, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "You were not part of the plan." He looked at her, and his gaze was open, almost vulnerable. "I thought it would just be a deal. Money, performance, and... But you made me see something different, something more, and I..." He paused, feeling the words become heavier. "I'm not ready for a relationship, Sophia. Not after everything. But I feel something for you, and it scares me." Her eyes softened, and she stepped closer until their shoulders were almost touching. The wind carried the scent of her perfume, something light, with a hint of citrus, and Jacob felt his heart beat faster. "Jake," she said quietly, and her voice was warm, as if she was holding his hand without even touching him. "I wasn't looking for anything like that either. I have Elena, work, a million things to do. Love." She smiled weakly, shaking her head. "That's the last thing I thought about. But you're not just a broken-hearted guy. You are the one who stayed when you could have left. The one who did more for my sister than I could have ever dreamed of. And yes," she looked into his eyes, and her gaze was cautious but sincere, "I feel something too. I don't know what it is, but it's there." Jacob looked at her, and at that moment the whole world, the river, the city, the stars narrowed down to her face. He felt the fear that had caged him begin to recede. Not disappear, but become quieter. He slowly raised his hand, his fingers touched her cheek, and she did not move away. Her skin was warm, and he felt a slight trembling. It was unclear whether it was his or hers. "Can?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Sophia did not respond with words. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes still holding him, and that was permission. Jacob leaned in, slowly, as if he was afraid to startle the moment, and their lips met. The kiss was gentle, careful, like the first step on thin ice. There was no rush in it, only a warmth that spread in the chest, as if they had both finally exhaled. They pulled away, but not far. Their foreheads almost touched each other. Sophia smiled, not the mischievous smile she gave in the cafe, but with something soft, almost fragile. It was unexpected, she said, her voice trembling with light laughter. But good. Okay, he echoed, feeling his own smile widen. Very good. They stood there for a few more seconds without saying a word. Sophia took his hand, her fingers intertwined with his, and it was so natural, as if they had done this 1,000 times. They turned to the river, looking at the water, and Jacob felt that for the first time in a long time he was not running from the past. He was here with her, and that was enough. He squeezed her hand, and his voice was firm despite the warmth in his chest. Together, he agreed. They walked further along the river, their steps slow and their silence comfortable. Jacob sat next to Sophia in the third-floor waiting room, where the white walls and humming lights made it feel like time had stood still. A light rain was drizzling outside the window, and drops flowed down the glass, as if the city itself was crying. Today was the day of Elena's operation, long awaited, but frightening, like an abyss into which you are afraid to look. Sophia sat hunched over, her fingers fiddling with the edge of the scarf that she had never taken off. Her face was pale, her eyes were red from a sleepless night, but she held on as always, with a strength that Jacob had learned to notice behind her smiles. Only now this power seemed fragile, like glass, ready to crack at the slightest blow. She'll be fine, he said quietly, even though his own heart was pounding as if he were running a marathon. Doctors know their stuff. You said it yourself, Dr. Lopez is the best in the state. Sophia nodded, but her gaze was focused on the door behind, which the gurney with Elena had disappeared less than an hour ago. Jacob remembered the morning, how they arrived at the hospital, how Elena, despite her weakness, joked that after the operation she would demand pizza with triple cheese. She hugged Sophia so tightly that she could barely hold back her tears, and even tried to wink at Jacob, calling him his sister's hero. But now, when she was taken to the operating room, the gaiety dissolved, leaving only tense silence. I know they're professionals, Sophia finally said, her voice hoarse, as if every word was difficult. But this is Elena. She's all I have, Jake, if something goes wrong. She fell silent, her lips trembling, and she turned away, hiding her face. Jacob felt his chest tighten. He wanted to say something right, something that would relieve her fear, but there were no words. Instead, he moved closer and took her hand. Her fingers were cold, almost icy, but she did not pull away, but squeezed his palm so tightly that he felt her pulse. I'm here, he said, and his voice was firm despite the storm inside. Whatever happens, you are not alone, Sophia. We will get through this together. She looked at him, and her eyes were filled with tears that she was still trying to hold back. For a moment, she thought she was going to crumble, but instead she nodded weakly, as if his words had become an anchor. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what I would do without you. He didn't answer, just held her hand, feeling how her trembling was transmitted to him. The waiting room was almost empty, only an elderly woman in the corner was leafing through a magazine, and a nurse occasionally walked by, her sneakers creaking quietly on the linoleum. The clock on the wall ticked agonizingly slowly, each minute dragging on like an hour. Jacob looked at the arrows, trying to distract himself, but his thoughts returned to Sophia, to her fear, to Elena, who was now lying under the bright lights of the operating room. Remember how she tried to teach me to dance? Sophia suddenly said, her voice was barely audible. Elena, I mean. She was 13, just beginning to recover from her first treatment. She turned on some pop music at full volume and made me spin around the living room. And I kept stepping on her feet. Jacob smiled despite the gravity of the moment. She told me, he said. She said that you were hopeless, but stubborn, and that she still loves you. Sophia laughed weakly, but the laughter immediately turned into a quiet sob. She covered her face with her free hand, and her shoulders shook. She's so strong, Jake, she whispered. Stronger than me. I have to be brave for her, but I'm so afraid. He moved even closer until their knees touched and squeezed her hand tighter. "You are brave," he said, looking into her eyes. "You carry this world on your shoulders, Sophia. For Elena, for myself. And the fact that you are afraid does not make you weaker. It makes you human." She looked at him, and her tears finally broke through. They flowed quietly, without sobs, but every drop was like a cry that she kept inside. Jacob didn't know what to do, but instinct took over. He carefully hugged her, pulling her towards him. Sophia leaned into his shoulder, her breathing ragged, and her hands clutched his jacket as if he were the only thing keeping her afloat. "Everything will be fine," he whispered, although he himself was not sure. "Elena is strong, like you. She can handle it. We can handle it." They sat there, hugging each other, until her tears dried up. Sophia pulled away, wiping her face with her sleeve, and her gaze was a little clearer, although fear was still lurking in the corners of her eyes. "You don't have to be here," she said, her voice weak but sincere. "But you stayed. Why?" Jacob looked at her, and the answer came naturally, simple and honest. "Because you are important to me," he said. "And Elena too. I can't just leave." Her lips twitched into a faint smile, and she squeezed his hand again. They fell silent, but this silence was warm, as if they were sharing something more than words. Jacob held her hand, feeling their fingers intertwined, and that small gesture was an anchor for both of them. The operating room door finally opened, and Dr. Lopez stepped out, removing his mask. Sophia stood up, her face white, and Jacob stood up with her, not letting go of her hand. "Miss Martinez," the doctor began, his voice tired but calm. "The operation was successful. Elena is in intensive care, but she is stable. We'll keep an eye on her, but so far everything looks good." Sophia gasped, her hand squeezing Jacob's palms so tightly that he felt pain, but did not move. She looked at the doctor, then at Jacob, and her eyes filled with new tears, this time of relief. "Is she okay?" Her voice trembled. "Is it true?" "Yes," the doctor nodded, his face softening. "She's a fighter. Give her time, and she will be with you." Sophia covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shook, but now they were tears of joy. Jacob hugged her again, and she pressed herself against him, her breath warm on his neck. He felt her heartbeat, her relief, and his own chest was torn with emotions he couldn't name. "Thank you," she whispered into his shoulder, "for everything." He didn't answer, just held her until she pulled away, wiping away her tears. Her hand was still in his, and they stood there, looking at each other in the waiting room, where time had finally begun to move forward. Sunlight filtered through the blinds of the hospital room, drawing golden stripes on the white walls. Elena lay on the bed, connected to monitors that beeped quietly, tracking her pulse. Her face was pale, but her eyes sparkled with a life that was not there just yesterday. The operation was successful, and although doctors warned that recovery would take time, the first signs of Elena returning to herself were already noticeable. Sophia sat next to her, holding her sister's hand, her own face a mixture of fatigue and relief. Jacob stood at the door, not wanting to get in the way, but unable to leave. "Seriously, Sophie," Elena's voice was weak, but there was already a familiar mockery in it. "Did you even sleep? You look like you were in a zombie movie." Sophia snorted, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. The tears had flowed almost non-stop since the doctor announced the success of the operation, and now they were a mixture of joy and exhaustion. "Are you talking about zombies?" she answered, her voice trembled, but her smile was sincere. "You just got out of intensive care, and you're already joking. I can't believe it. What else should I do?" Elena shrugged her shoulders weakly, her lips curling into a slight smirk. "Lying down and whining, not my style. Besides," she looked at Jacob, who was standing with a package in his hands, "I have a whole fan club here." "Really, hero?" Jacob smiled, feeling warmth in his chest at her words. He stepped closer, placing the package on the nightstand next to the bed. "Fan club is a big word," he said, taking out a bouquet of daisies tied with a blue ribbon. "But I thought flowers wouldn't hurt." Elena raised an eyebrow, but her eyes lit up. "Daisies, She looked at Sophia with feigned reproach. Sister, you definitely talked him into it. These are your favorites. Sophia blushed, glancing quickly at Jacob. I didn't say anything, she muttered, but her smile grew wider. Himself. Jacob shrugged, trying to hide his awkwardness. Just guessing, he said, although in fact he remembered Sophia once mentioning daisies when they were walking by the river. He turned to Elena, taking out a teddy bear with a red bow from the bag. And this is for you, so that you don't get bored. Elena laughed quietly, but sincerely, and this sound was like music after a long silence. She picked up the bear, hugging it to her chest. You are officially my favorite person, she declared, looking at Jacob. Sophie, I'm sorry, but he bypassed you. Sophia shook her head, her eyes shining with tears again, but now she was laughing along with her sister. I don't mind, she said, her voice soft. He deserved it. Jacob felt a warmth spread in his chest. He looked at them at Elena, who, despite her weakness, joked as if there had been no operation or months of pain, at Sophia, whose face finally lit up with real joy. It was more than he could have dreamed of when he started fundraising. It was, right? Okay, he said, clapping his hands. I'm here not only with flowers and toys. You're both probably tired of hospital food, right? Elena grimaced, pointing to a tray of untouched jelly. You can't even call it food, she said. Seriously, who came up with the idea that jelly is normal? That's why I brought something. Jacob took the containers out of the bag. Nothing complicated, chicken tacos, some rice, salad. I cooked it myself, so don't blame me if I oversalted it. Sophia looked at him, her eyes widening. Did you cook? Her voice was a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Jake, you're already doing too much. Nonsense, he waved it off, laying out the food on the small table by the bed. It's the least I can do. Besides, I promised Helena normal food when she gets better. Elena grinned, reaching for the container, although Sophia immediately stopped her, reminding her of the doctor's recommendations. Just try, she told her sister, but her tone was gentle. First, I'll check what you can do. You're worse than a nurse, Elena muttered, but obediently leaned back on the pillow, still clutching the bear. They ate right in the room, breaking all hospital rules, but no one objected. The nurse who stopped by to check the monitors just smiled and pretended not to notice the taco aroma. Sophia ate slowly, her gaze constantly returning to Elena, as if she was afraid that her sister would disappear if she turned away. Jacob sat across from him, watching them, and felt like he belonged here, with these two girls who had become more than just part of the plan to him. When Elena dozed off, tired from talking and eating, Sophia carefully covered her with a blanket and went out with Jacob into the corridor. Her face was still wet from tears, but now they were tears of relief mixed with something deeper. I don't know how to thank you, she said, her voice quiet but warm. You gave us hope, Jake. Not just money, not just food or flowers. You gave us a future. He looked at her, and his heart sank at her words. He wanted to say that she was the one who gave him something purpose, meaning, but instead, he simply stepped closer. You don't have to thank me, he said, his voice soft. I did it because you and Elena are important. For me. Sophia smiled, her eyes sparkling in the light of the hospital lamps. She reached out and hugged him, not impulsively, but slowly, as if she wanted to remember this moment. Jacob hugged her back, feeling the warmth of her body, her breath on his neck. They stood there for a few seconds, and that was all. What they needed was a quiet intimacy that spoke louder than any words. Will you stay? She asked, pulling away, but her hands were still on his shoulders. At least for a little while? Of course, he answered, and his smile was sincere. I'm not going anywhere. Jacob stood at the entrance to the hospital, holding a bunch of colorful balloons that Sophia insisted on buying, claiming that Elena deserved the holiday. Today was the day of discharge, the day they were waiting for with trepidation and hope. Elena, still weak, but with a sparkle in her eyes, was about to return home, and Jacob felt his heart beat a little faster with anticipation. Sophia walked out of the hospital doors, holding Elena's arm. The girl looked better than in the ward a week ago. Her cheeks were slightly pink, and her dark hair was braided into a neat braid. She saw Jacob and the balls, and her face lit up with a big smile. "Seriously, Jake?" she exclaimed, her voice still weak but full of life. "Balls? Have you decided to throw me a birthday party?" "Not a birthday, but a homecoming," he replied, coming closer and handing her the bundle. "This is officially cooler." Elena laughed, her eyes sparkling, and she hugged him tightly, almost dropping her balls. "You're the best," she said, pulling away. "But I'm still waiting for that triple cheese pizza you promised." We agreed, he winked, feeling the warmth of her joy. Sophia stood nearby, looking at her sister with such tenderness that Jacob involuntarily kept his gaze on her. Her face, freed from hospital anxiety, was soft, almost radiant. She caught his eye and smiled, not the mischievous smile she had in the cafe, but something deep, personal. They didn't say it out loud, but after the operation, after their conversations, and that kiss by the river, they both knew. They were no longer pretending. It was real. They piled into Jacob's car, Elena in the back seat, still clutching her balls, Sophia in front. The ride home was filled with laughter and chatter. Elena told how the nurse tried to teach her to knit, and Sophia teased her for giving up ground and not running away from the room. Jacob listened, occasionally throwing in his own jokes, and felt his life, which had been in the shadows for so long, begin to fill with light. Sophia and Elena's house was small, with shabby paint on the walls and a cozy mess inside. Jacob helped carry things in, and Elena immediately collapsed on the sofa, declaring that hospital beds are a crime against humanity. Sophia rolled her eyes, but her smile was full of love. "You're officially home now," she said, adjusting the pillow under her sister's head. "But don't think that I will serve you. Tomorrow you will wash the dishes yourself." "Dream," Elena snorted, but her gaze was warm. She looked at Jacob, who was fiddling with his bags by the door. "Hey, Jake, you're on my side, aren't you? Tell her that I am a national treasure and don't have to wash the dishes." "National treasure?" He laughed, putting the bag on the floor. "Okay, I'll think about it, but only if you stop stealing my chips." They continued to banter until Sophia sent Elena to rest, insisting that she needed time to recover. When her sister went to her room, Sophia turned to Jacob, her eyes sparkling. "Thank you for being with us today," she said quietly. "That means a lot. For her, for me." He stepped closer, feeling the distance between them becoming not just physical, but something more. "I wouldn't miss it," he replied, his voice soft. "And, Sophia, I wanted to ask, not as part of a deal, not as something random. Do you want to come with me on a date? Present." Her lips twitched into a smile, but there was a slight uncertainty in her gaze, not fear, but caution, as if she was still getting used to this new reality. "A real date?" she asked. Her voice was light but warm. "Jacob Rivera, you are becoming bolder." "I'm trying," he smiled, but his heart was pounding. "So what do you say?" She looked at him, and her smile grew wider, almost radiant. "I'll say yes," she replied, "but only if you don't take me to the mesquite. I live there anyway." Their first official date was simple but perfect. Jacob picked her up that evening, and they drove to a small restaurant on the outskirts of town that served homemade pasta and had live music, a saxophonist in the corner playing heart-pounding tunes. Sophia put on a dress dark green, with thin straps, and Jacob couldn't take his eyes off her. She laughed at his attempts to pronounce the name of the desert correctly, and he teased her about the way she neatly folded her napkin after eating. After dinner, they decided not to return home straight away. Jacob suggested going up to the roof of the old building where his friend worked as a security guard and sometimes let friends look at the stars. Sophia agreed, her eyes lighting up with curiosity. The roof was simple, with cracked asphalt and a couple of old chairs, but the view was stunning. Albuquerque lay below, twinkling with lights, and overhead the stars burned so brightly that it seemed you could reach them with your hand. Jacob spread out the blanket he'd grabbed from the car, and they sat shoulder to shoulder, looking up at the sky. "It's beautiful," Sophia said, her voice quiet, almost reverent. I haven't looked at the stars for 100 years. I run and work all the time and forget to raise my head. Me too, he admitted, looking at her. But with you, I begin to notice such things. She turned to him, her face soft in the moonlight. Her eyes sparkled and Jacob felt his heart skip a beat. He slowly took her hand, their fingers intertwined, and it was so natural, as if they had always been together. Jake, she said, her voice barely audible, do you know that I didn't believe in such things? In us. After everything that happened with Elena, with life. But you made me believe. He leaned closer, feeling the warmth of her breath. You did the same for me, he replied. I thought I had lost everything. But you gave me life back. Their lips met not hastily, as the first time, but with confidence, with warmth that spoke of something more than words. The kiss was soft but deep, as if they promised each other not only this night, but everything that would come next. When they pulled away, Sophia smiled, her cheeks turning slightly pink. This is officially the best date, she said, her voice light but sincere. I'm glad I didn't let you down, he replied, and his smile was wider than he expected. The annual hot air balloon festival was in full swing and the city was buzzing with anticipation. Jacob, Sophia, and Elena stood at the edge of the Fiesta Park field, where the grass was still wet from the morning dew. The smells of coffee, fresh pastries, and something elusive hope that always accompanied this event were in the air. Balloons, bright as children's dreams, rose one after another, filling the sky with spots of red, blue, yellow, and green. Elena, with a scarf around her neck and a camera in her hands, was delighted. Her health had improved markedly in recent weeks, and although she still tired easily, her energy was contagious. She ran from one end of the field to the other, photographing everything balls in the shape of stars, smiling suns, even one that looked like a giant panda. Look, this one looks like a cake, she shouted, pointing to a ball with multicolored stripes. Jake, you owe me a cake if you promised me pizza, Jacob laughed, adjusting her hat, which had slipped to one side. Cake, pizza, what else? He teased. Soon you'll want your own personal balloon. Don't tempt me, Elena winked before rushing off again to the next photo subject. Sophia stood next to Jacob, her hand in his, warm and familiar. She looked at the sky, her face was calm, but the colors of the balls were reflected in her eyes, as if she was absorbing all this beauty. Her hair fluttered in the wind, and Jacob found himself unable to look away. Over the past months, she had become more than just a partner for him, more than someone with whom he shared laughter and tears. She was his home, the place where he finally felt like he belonged. It's like a fairy tale, Sophia said quietly, without taking her eyes off the sky. Every year I wanted to get here, but something always got in the way. And now, here we are, all together. It's not just an accident, Jacob replied, squeezing her hand. We deserve it. You, Elena, me. She turned to him. Her smile was soft, but there was something about it that made his heart beat faster. He knew that this day would be special, not only because of the festival, not only because of the balloons. He had been planning this for weeks, carrying a box with a ring in his pocket, waiting for the moment to be right. And now, standing here, under the endless sky, he realized the moment had come. Sophia, he began, his voice slightly hoarse with excitement. Can I see you for a minute? She raised an eyebrow, but nodded, her gaze becoming curious. What are you planning? She asked, but followed him when he led her a little to the side, away from the crowd, to the edge of the field, where it was quieter. Elena noticed their movement and shouted, Hey, where are you going? I haven't taken a photo of you in front of that blue ball yet. We'll be back soon, Jacob responded without turning around. His pulse was pounding in his temples, but he felt a strange calm, as if everything he did was the only right thing. They stopped at a low fence where the balls rose so close that they could see the patterns on their fabric. Jacob turned to Sophia, her face illuminated by the morning light, and he suddenly realized that he had never seen anything more beautiful. Sophia, he said, taking her by both hands, I thought for a long time how to say this. You know what I was like when we met. angry, lost, thinking only about how to take revenge on someone. But you changed everything. You showed me that you can be better, that you can love even when it seems impossible. Her eyes widened and she squeezed his hands, her breathing becoming a little faster. Jake, she began, but he shook his head gently, asking her to let him finish. I'm not perfect, he continued, his voice firm but full of warmth. And life is not ideal. But with you, I want to build it day after day, with all the ups and downs. You are my best, Sophia, and I want you to be with me. Always. He dropped to one knee, taking a small box from his pocket. When he opened it, a simple silver ring with a tiny sapphire glinted in the sunlight. Sophia gasped, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes shining with tears. Sophia Martinez, he said, looking into her eyes, will you marry me? Silence hung between them, but it was alive, full of emotions. Sophia looked at him, her lips trembled, and tears were already rolling down her cheeks. Then she laughed quietly, happily, and nodded. Yes, she said, her voice hoarse but firm. Yes, Jake, I will marry you. He stood up, and she threw herself into his arms, their laughter mingling with her tears. Jacob placed the ring on her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They embraced, and the world around them, the balloons, the crowd, the sky became the backdrop to their moment. Hey, Elena's voice burst into their bubble of happiness. She ran up, her camera dangling from her neck, and her eyes were round in surprise. Is this what I'm thinking about? Are you? Are you engaged? Sophia laughed, showing her the ring. Yeah, she said, her voice full of joy. He persuaded me. Elena squealed as she rushed towards them and hugged them both so tightly that Jacob almost choked. You are crazy, she exclaimed, pulling away, but her smile was wider than the sky. I knew it. I told you, Jake, you don't just sneak us pizza. V knew. He raised his hands in a playful gesture of surrender, but his heart sang. Elena grabbed the camera and began to command. So, stand here, against the backdrop of the balls. I'll take a photo that you can show to the children later. Sophie, smile, don't cry. Jake, hug her like in the movies. They obeyed, laughing as Elena clicked the camera. Jacob put his arm around Sophia's waist, and she pressed herself against him, her hand with the ring resting on his chest. The balloons rose behind them, carrying colors and hopes into the sky, and each takeoff was a symbol of what they left behind: pain, fear, loneliness. This is perfect, Sophia whispered, looking at him as Elena continued to take pictures. You're perfect. Not really, he answered, touching her cheek. But with you, I'm close to it. The ranch on the outskirts of Albuquerque was bathed in the golden light of late summer. The wide field, surrounded by old oak trees, was decorated with garlands of light bulbs that swayed in the light breeze, promising to glow brighter as the evening wore on. White chairs stood in rows in front of a wooden arch covered in daisies and eucalyptus, and the smell of freshly cut grass and something sweet hope perhaps hung in the air. Today was Jacob and Sophia's wedding day, a day they both once thought impossible. The guests had already gathered: Jacob's colleagues from the architectural bureau, several of Sophia's friends from the theater, distant relatives who had arrived from Santa Fe. Lisa, energetic as ever, helped direct people to their seats while poking fun at how Jacob looked too serious to be a groom. But Jacob barely heard her. He stood at the arch, straightening his dark blue jacket, and his heart was pounding with a mixture of excitement and joy. He looked at the path leading to the house where Sophia was supposed to appear, and felt that his entire past pain, betrayal, loneliness remained somewhere far away, like a shadow that had melted under the sun. Elena came out first, and the crowd gasped. She was the bridesmaid, wearing a lavender dress that highlighted her radiant smile. Her health had improved in recent months, and although she still moved cautiously, her steps were confident. She was carrying a basket of daisy petals, which she scattered on the grass, and her eyes sparkled with happiness. As she passed Jacob, she winked at him and whispered, "Don't screw it up, groom." She could still change her mind. He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "I'll try," he answered, and his voice was full of warmth. The music, a soft melody on a guitar, became louder, and everyone turned around. Sophia appeared on the path, and Jacob felt his breath stop. Her dress was simple but elegant white, with lace sleeves and a long train that flowed across the grass. Her hair was down, with daisies woven in, and her smile was the same one that had once made his heart flutter in the Mesquite Cafe. She walked slowly, holding the bouquet, and her eyes were fixed on him, full of love that did not need words. When she stood next to her, Jacob took her hand, and their fingers intertwined as if they had never been apart. The officer began the ceremony, his voice warm, but Jacob barely heard the words. He looked at Sophia, at her eyes that sparkled in the sun, and knew that this was his home, his future. Jacob, Sophia, the officer said, smiling, you have prepared your vows. Jacob, will you start? He nodded, taking a deep breath. His voice was slightly hoarse, but firm. Sophia, he began, looking into her eyes, I didn't believe in fate until I met you. You came into my life when I was lost and showed me that it was possible to start again. You taught me to laugh, to love, to be better. I vow to be there for you in good days and in difficult ones, to hold your hand and never let go. Thank you for choosing me. Her lips trembled and she squeezed his hand tighter, her eyes shining with tears. Then she spoke, her voice soft but full of strength. Jacob, she said, her words sounding like a promise. I thought I knew what strength was until I saw you fight for those you care about. You gave Elena and me more than I could have dreamed of, not only hope, but also family. I vow to love you, support you, laugh with you, even when things don't go according to plan. You are my heart, and I choose you today and always. The guests fell silent, some were wiping away tears, and Elena in the front row was shining as if she were the sun herself. The officer pronounced them husband and wife, and Jacob kissed Sophia tenderly, but with such depth that the world around him disappeared. The guests applauded, Elena squealed, and daisy petals flew into the air like little stars. The celebration continued in the open area of the ranch, where tables were set under a canopy and music flowed from the speakers. Children ran between the chairs, adults raised their glasses, and Elena, forgetting about fatigue, danced with Lisa, waving her bouquet. Jacob and Sophia opened with a dance slow, to a tune they had chosen together, and her head rested on his shoulder as if it was the most natural place in the world. When it was time for her speeches, Sophia stood up holding a glass of lemonade. She declined the wine, saying she wanted to remember every moment. Her dress fluttered slightly in the wind, and she looked as if she was glowing from within. I'm not a master of speeches, she began. Her voice was warm, but trembled slightly with emotion. But today I want to say thank you. Thank you to Elena, my sister, my best friend, for reminding me what is worth living for. She looked at Elena, who was wiping away tears, pretending that it was dust in the eye. Thank you to all of you who were with us, who supported us when it was hard. And thanks to Jacob, her gaze found him, and her eyes sparkled. You are not just my husband. You are the one who showed me that love is not just words, but actions. You gave us a family, and I will never stop thanking you for that. The guests gasped and applauded, and Jacob felt his throat tighten. He stood up without planning to speak, but the words came of their own accord. I'll be brief, he said, his voice hoarse but sincere. I thank fate for everything that brought me here. For the pain, for the mistakes, for that day when I walked into Mesquite and saw Sophia behind the counter. He looked at her, and his smile was full of love. That scene in the cafe changed my life. You changed my life, and I promise that I will try to be worthy of you every day. Sophia stepped towards him, hugged him, and their kiss was drowned in applause. Elena ran up, squeezing herself into their arms, her laughter louder than the music. You're both so snotty, she said, but her eyes sparkled with happiness. But I love you. Albuquerque was buzzing on a Saturday morning. The streets were full of people rushing to the market or cafe. Jacob walked down Central Avenue, carrying a paper bag containing the bakery muffins that Sophia liked for breakfast. A light breeze carried the smell of coffee and freshly cut grass, and there was warmth in his chest not only from the sun, but also from the thought that Sophia and Elena were waiting for him at home, planning another tabletop evening. Their life after marriage became simpler but fuller, as if every day added a new color to their overall picture. He turned into an intersection when his gaze involuntarily caught on the familiar silhouettes ahead. My heart skipped a beat, but not from pain, more from surprise. Clara and Mateo stood at the entrance to a small bookstore, just a few steps away. Clara was holding a paper cup of coffee. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, and Mateo was saying something, gesticulating with his usual energy. They didn't notice him, and for a second Jacob thought he might just walk by, disappear into the crowd. But then Clara looked up and their eyes met. She froze, her face turned pale, and the glass shook slightly in her hand. Mateo followed her gaze and stopped too, his smile fading. Jacob felt time slow down, but there was no rage or pain inside, only calm, like the surface of a lake after a storm. "Jake," Clara stepped forward, her voice cautious, almost pleading. "Can we talk?" He stopped, holding the package in his hands, and looked at her. Her face was familiar, but now it seemed alien, like a photo from an old album. Mateo stood slightly behind, his hands in his pockets, and he looked awkward, as if he didn't know where to go. "We have nothing to talk about," Jacob said, his voice even, without a trace of anger. "I said everything I wanted a long time ago." Clara swallowed, her eyes sparkling, but she didn't look away. "Please," she said more quietly, "I know that I ruined everything. I just want to apologize. For everything. For lies, for pain. I didn't expect this to happen." Mateo cleared his throat as he stepped closer. His face was serious, without the usual bravado. "She's right, Jake," he said, his voice hoarse. "I was a shitty friend. Worse than crap. I have no excuse, but I'm sorry. Is it true?" Jacob looked at them, at Clara, whose fingers were nervously squeezing the glass, at Mateo, who for the first time ever looked genuinely guilty. Once upon a time, these words might have meant something. Once they could have hurt or healed. But now they were just sounds, empty, like the wind blowing through the street. He shook his head slowly, his gaze calm but firm. "I don't need your apology," he said. "You made your choice. I hope it was worth my pain. I have nothing to talk to you about." Clara opened her mouth as if to add something, but Jacob had already turned around. He didn't feel the need to shout, argue, or prove. His life was somewhere else, in Sophia's laughter, in Elena's jokes, in their small apartment, where in the morning it smelled of coffee and chamomile tea. Clara and Mateo remained in the past, like shadows that could no longer touch him. "Jake, wait," Clara began, but her voice cut off when he walked on without looking back. He walked down the street, the bag of buns rustled slightly in his hands, and the sun warmed his shoulders. Ahead was his life, not ideal, but full of love, which he once considered impossible. And neither Clara, nor Mateo, nor their words could change that. When he entered the apartment, Sophia greeted him with a smile, and Elena immediately pounced and asked if he had taken the cinnamon rolls. Jacob laughed as he placed the bag on the table and felt the last fragments of the past dissolve into the warmth of the present. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.